Welcome to a new episode of Ask an Adventurer. Right, here we go. Let's get some questions coming on, baby. How do we balance adventure with environmentalism? Surely part of the requirement to appreciate the environment and adventures is to help protect it. But increased footfall and damage from visiting popular places, the need to show off our adventures on social media, follow me on Instagram by the way, the increased carbon footprint, huge rise in litter, damage, fires. What can you do as a figurehead for the adventure industry to help? Often messages are put out by those who have already travelled the world or made a big carbon footprint advising against such adventure activities, which can come across as, I've had my cake, sorry, none left for you. Oh, right, crikey. I think it's fantastic that lots of people go on adventures. That's my number one point. I think it's great that there's been a real increase back since COVID of people getting out into the outdoors. That's my number 2 point. I think that people sharing their adventures on social media, as long as it's not just done in a really smug, unrealistic way, is good because it can encourage more different people to get involved. For example, maybe if I do it might encourage, let's say, some older woman to do an adventure, and she puts her picture online, and that encourages her friends who are other older women to go have adventures who wouldn't be interested in following me, for example. So I think in that sense it spreads, and I think generally adventures are great because, well, they are, but in terms of this question they're good because they start to get people engaged with the natural world and therefore hopefully starting to care from it. These are all good things. But increased footfall and damage is a problem. I think that's a really good argument, ironically, for increasing the right to roam, because by spreading people more broadly across the landscape, it will massively help the footfall on places like Snowdon. If you spread out everyone who's on Snowdon across all the hills across Snowdonia, then it'd be fine, there'd be no problem. Except those people leave litter. And that is a problem, littering across the place. And I really think that banning people isn't the problem. You know, we already ban people from the land and it's currently covered in plastic bottles and fly tipping. I think we need to open up the land and get people to care and take responsibility for the land through educating them. I know that's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Carbon footprint. I really don't think you need to jet off around the world to have an adventure. My best ever adventure involved getting on a bicycle and pedalling away from my front door. And I really increasingly see it as problematic when adventure influencers like me are flying off to far off parts of the world on massively expensive carbon burning flights to show how much they love nature, and that just feels really contradictory, not least of all because by being an influencer, it's not just you doing that, you're encouraging other people to that behaviour as well. So I think that is a problem. However, this virtue signalling message from me is coming from someone who's already travelled the world, made a massive carbon footprint. So I did cycle around the world, very eco. I've also flown to Greenland and then flown in a little plane into the heart of Greenland and done lots of other adventures, brilliant adventures, wonderful adventures like that burned huge amounts of carbon. So yeah, very much I've had my cake, and very much I'm sorry there's none left for you. Very true. However, adventuring without really harming the planet is not a worse form of adventure. I've really found a lot of joy and satisfaction and reward and benefits and challenges from adventuring in a more environmentally conscious way. So yeah, I feel very bad that I was trashing the planet before I was aware of the harm I was doing, and I was then trashing the planet when I was aware of the harm I was doing it, but not yet willing to change my behaviour. I feel bad about that, but I got there belatedly. And I really don't think that adventuring has to be worse doing it in a way that cares for nature. I think that's the key overriding point of this, which hopefully overrides the Flugscham, the flight shaming of people. Oh, crikey, this is an enormously long one here. Let me zip down and see if I can paraphrase. It's from Kath. Which brings me to a question. Finally, if you've made it this far, she wrote quite a lot. Oh, she's wrote me a really long message which you don't need to read about adventure filming, how and where to start. How do you start? Get your phone, get a tripod, and you're in business. Do not underestimate the importance of audio. So if you can get a little microphone to go with your phone, and that'll sort of help offset the wind noise. Audio is so much more important than you think about. Watch simple but fantastic films on YouTube. Beau Miles would be a great starting point. And then make sure you film the times when you can't be bothered to film, when you're tired, fed up, freezing cold, soaking wet, terrified. Those are the times you need to film. Yeah, and then watch Beau Miles and copy his films. And his big ginger beard. Calf, sorry. Right, please talk about hunting, fishing and foraging, please. Talk about how nature and being outdoors is basically a cure for nearly any mental illness. Gosh, The Last Child in the Woods is a good book to read. Also, The Nature Fix. Yeah, being in nature and outdoors is the absolute wonder drug that the NHS needs to be getting all of us to try and pop once a day, rather than being a health organisation that's trying to fix our broken society. We really need to become a preventative health service of getting people exercising, moving, outdoors, fit, healthy, and the headspace that comes from that. There's so much benefit to the NHS on that. Throw in a little bit of foraging, getting people out to collect blackberries, make nettle soup, healthy, simple food, wild garlic pesto to put on your pizza, healthy, simple, free food, fantastic. Hunting and fishing, I am less familiar with. I would say that I love to catch myself a fish and then cook it and eat it. That's fantastic. I really enjoy doing that. It's delicious. It's tasty. It feels like an entirely sustainable activity. There's zero bycatch pollution, ghost fishing involved in that sort of thing. Hunting, I don't know much about hunting. What do I know about hunting? Okay, a can of worms opening. I think that breeding millions of pheasants and partridges artificially in our landscape to then release them and shoot them is ridiculous. I think that the amount of red deer hampering nature and tree growth and rewilding in Scotland, and people paying vast amounts of money to hunt that, is ridiculous. I think that anyone you see on Instagram proudly shooting elephants is ridiculous. Although this does then lead on to the sort of more complicated side of it, in that there are parts of little pockets of Africa where there are too many elephants, for example, or some other wild game, and if it needs to be culled, then maybe getting some moron to pay $100,000 for it, which will massively help the local economy, is a good thing. Ditto with culling of deer, I suppose. And then you get, I suppose, the more, I think of it as like the Alaskan type of hunting and trapping, where you catch yourself a wild beast, a moose or something, and you turn it into your year's supply of meat, and it is a sustainable, healthy practice, and I'm all for that sort of hunting, very much so. I really like that book by Michael Pollan, The Omnivore's Dilemma. It's really good. He follows a few meals from field to plate, starting with a McDonald's meal. Can he follow McDonald's from the disgusting industrial cattle lot that's just stinking out the atmosphere with knee-deep feces, through the horrific chemical factories where he's barred access all the way to his McDonald's drive-through, which he admits is delicious, but all kind of gross. Second one, he gets a chicken reared on a nice organic farm, and he buys that for $20 and cooks it and eats it. And then the third one, he learned how to hunt, and he shoots an animal and cooks it. And so that's a really interesting thing about thinking about how we get our food. And something I think that is so important with us with food, so important, is we need to stop thinking, oh, I really want to eat X, Y, and Z this week, therefore farms and the planet needs to provide me with X, Y, and Z. What we really, really need to be thinking is, what can the agricultural world prepare sustainably for me, which is foods A, B, C, and D? Okay, they are the things that I will eat. So for farmers to be growing nature and a sustainable, nature-focused agricultural planet, and then we eat what that produces, rather than just thinking, I really want massive steak covered in cheese, and that's delicious, so that's what I'm going to have every day, and then buying it without thinking through the process that the planet is literally not big enough for everyone to eat that way. Those sorts of things. Sorry, Joshua, I went off on a detour there, but I will agree fully about the benefits of nature, being outdoors, foraging, sustainable fishing, and putting a moose in your freezer for being good for your physical and mental health. Have you ever had any spooky or eerie experiences while you're out on your own? No, I have not had any spooky or eerie experiences. No, I'm afraid that my sort of spiritual side of adventuring life is pretty much non-existent. Right, sorry, I'm trying to talk to you and also do some admin on my filming Ask an Adventure spreadsheet. How boring is this for you to have to watch? Look, I'm clicking through a spreadsheet. Is that exciting? Right, I'm back in the room. Is it better to adventure while you're young than settle down and have to remember all the great things you did? Or is it better to adventure late in life and escape your established room? Is it worse to look back at what you may not get to do again, or look forward to what you may do? Oh, what an amazingly good question. I think the answer is to do both. Do both. Go on adventures while you're young, then settle down and remember all the great things, and then adventure again later in life to escape from your established routine. Both. That's what you want. Both. That's greedy though. So to answer your question, I think the best thing to do is to adventure as soon as you possibly can in your life. So the best time to adventure is 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. Because whilst it is great to plan for one day in the future having great adventures, you might be dead by then. You might not be able to walk. So have adventures as soon as you possibly can. But also, I suppose, it's also good to have the adventures to dream of, to keep you going through the busyness of normal life. And then there are all the adventures to come. Definitely. Do both, though. Sorry. Next question. Are there limits? If so, how do you know them? We can say we can do anything if we're well prepared, but surely there are limits. Do we listen to our body, or do we push on? Well, a good thing if you in terms of limits is to maybe watch on YouTube about a marathon called the Barkley Marathons. That's really good, about exploring what are actual limits. Are the limits real, or are they imagined? I really think that what we feel as our physical limits are probably only 40% of our actual limits, and that's the massive appeal of people entering 5Ks, 10Ks, marathons, ultra marathons, Barkley marathons, walking to the South Pole, is to just plumb the depths of what is possible and push closer and closer to your limits, because that's a really expanding experience for the realities of daily life. What's the longest time you spent without any human contact? Any reflection on the experience? I always feel a bit of a fraud in terms of the longest time without any human contact, because I've done very little really. When I cycled around the world, I did about 10 days without any human contact. But friends of mine say Ben Saunders done polar trips of 70 days without seeing a human, and then rowers like Sarah Uten row Pacific Ocean on their own. That's months without human contact. More recently, I think regularly I go say 24 hours without it on micro adventures, and that's what I would really, probably more realistic for people watching this, to really urge you to dabble with, because it's absolutely fascinating to just spend even 24 hours on your own, and then when you return out of the woods after your 24 hours, it just the world just feels brighter and more interesting and varied, if only for a short while before it starts to settle back to normal. So I find being away from humans not very lonely. I definitely feel it's more of a solitude experience, and I find it quite liberating and freeing and not that scary, and not that daunting. I'm actually pretty cool with it, really. It's never really particularly bothered me. Certainly worth trying for an overnight trip. How long does it take to find sponsors for an adventure? Well, that's just down to luck. I mean, Bear Grylls, he was trying to climb Everest when he was a young unknown, and he, walking down the street, spotted some insurance company or solicitor's company or something called Everest Smith and Jones, and thought, and sent them a random letter to them, and Everest Smith and Jones sponsored his Everest trip, and the rest is history. Other times I spent 5 years with my friend Ben Saunders chasing money for a South Pole expedition, chasing £1 million, and within those 5 years failing to find that money. I quit the trip. Ben carried on, resilience, perseverance, found the money, did the trip. When I rode the Atlantic Ocean, I did so with a guy called Marian Medak. He's a Slovenian. No one really cared about me rowing the Atlantic. Like, millions of British people seem to row oceans, but he would be the first Slovenian to row an ocean, and that immediately made him more marketable and interesting and appealing. So some really rich guy in Slovenia who owns lots of supermarkets and also quite like adventuring stuff took a personal interest in Marian and sponsored the Atlantic trip. So how long it takes to find sponsors is just entirely down to the network of who you know, who knows someone, who knows someone, who knows someone. Random cold calling is almost never going to work. Bear Grylls, lucky guy. Actually lucky guy, but also smart. I mean, if you're going to random cold call a company for a trip to Everest, choose something called Everest Smith and Jones. And so it wasn't just random spamming. If you were starting out now, how would you pitch schools for doing talks? I would do it the way that I did 20 years ago, which is to start by having a personal connection. So speaking to the local school down the street from where you live, speaking to a friend of yours who is a teacher or a parent, and through that getting an approach into doing a talk in the school. Do a few talks like that, do them for free, get feedback from the schools on, hey, I hope my talk was all right. How can I make it better? What do you recommend? How can it fit in better with the struggles of teaching kids about life and subjects? What can be useful? Get some references from the school. Ask anyone who connected to those schools to directly recommend you to another school. Do a few more like that, and then little by little then you'll be able to start saying, yeah, I'd love to come to your school, and it'll cost you £50, and then woohoo, you're up and running, and by Christmas you'll have a Ferrari, guaranteed. Speaking of Ferraris and non sequiturs, you know what, I was going to quit for lunch then, but that's lazy of me. I'm going to answer a few more questions because it's not quite short. Where is your limit for adventuring? Where's the bar for two adventurers? And is this set by you or by blockers like money, time, and responsibilities? How much do limits affect our own or others' perception of us as an adventurer? Wow, really interesting question. Okay, where's the limit for too adventurous? So sometimes it will be money. I would love to do X, but I really don't have the money for that, and I don't have the energy or connections or whatever to spend years chasing sponsorship, and therefore it's a blocker. Time and responsibilities, ditto. I'd love to do X, but I can't because I don't have the time, I've got too many responsibilities, so that can't happen. So that does limit adventures for sure, and that applies to literally everyone. Everyone has their limits of those sorts of things. Some are higher than lower. And then the bar of being too adventurous being set internally, definitely that comes in terms of your personal risk, your willingness to suffer, how hard you're willing to go. It's something, the gambles you're willing to take in terms of percentage chance of success, percentage chance of death, and what sort of ratio you want between enjoyment of the adventure versus pure and utter sufferfest for the satisfaction of getting to the end goal. So yeah, there's very, very much internal limits, and of course those limits will very much affect your own perception of yourself. You might think, oh, I'm not an adventurous person because I don't want to sleep in a tent and I only want to go in a 5-star hotel on the Amalfi Coast, and that's, I guess, is a reflection of how adventurous you are as a person. Doesn't mean you're a bad person, but it does limit or dictate how adventurous you feel about yourself. Other people's perceptions of you as an adventurer, yeah, of course it will also affect them. People are always judging other people all the time. I mean, some people might be watching this thinking, this Alistair Humphreys guy is such a loser. He's only done X, Y, and Z, and yet he's pontificating. What a moron. And other people might be like, oh my God, Alistair Humphreys, he's done this. He's amazing. What an adventure guy. I love him. Sorry, I don't know why I did the mocking voice for people who think nice things about me. Apologies. You may now also hate me. But yeah, so people have those other opinions. But the vital thing to remember on this situation, of course, is the old mantra that the people who matter don't mind, and the people who do mind don't matter. So bear that in mind. Be your own arbiter of how adventurous you are. Another question about loneliness. I've talked about that recently. I'm currently in the process of writing my own adventure book. I'm already in the editing phase. What advice would you give to somebody who's writing his very first adventure book? What is it in your experience that makes people buy your books and get hooked to your stories? So an adventure book can succeed in a few different ways. It can have an incredible plot line but not be particularly well written. For example, and I don't mean this to disparage this book because I can't remember whether it was nicely written or not, but for example, 127 Hours, which is about that story about that guy who a rock fell on his arm in a canyon, no one knew he was there, and he had to cut off his arm with his penknife and escape. That's a cracking adventure story which you're going to read however poetic the writing is. Then you get books which are poetic and beautiful even though not much happens, e.g. As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning by Laurie Lee. Then you'll get books like the one, it's called something like 13 Lessons from the Thai Cave Diving Rescue Thing, something along those lines, which is an interesting story. The cave kids trapped in a cave in Thailand. It's okay written, but the point here is you're reading it in order to learn these 13 lessons for life. So you're going to be educated and learn stuff. So I guess your book needs to either be educational, inspirational, beautifully written, or just a cracking adventure story. Thank you so much for your questions. It's time for lunch. Come back soon.